Hello everybody, this is Ivan with AdvToolware, and today I'm going to teach you about doing inline loops in UMRA. Let's start off by creating a new project. This will be an automation project. Now you're probably familiar with the UMRA built-in loop. You can find it in the variable actions programming, the for each action. And if you look at it, it's a pretty straightforward loop. You specify the table variable, you specify the project that will be called for each iteration of the loop. You map the variables of the table, and then you have some additional options like which variables you want to pass, which variables you want to return, and your break conditions. Now, there's nothing wrong with this loop, it's pretty good. There's a performance concern because whenever you pass variables, it actually copies the entire tables. As opposed to if you call the project by itself, it passes those tables by reference. So this is something to look out for if you have a nested structure of loops. This could be detrimental to your performance. And what I'd like to show you is how to do an inline loop, basically a loop that lets you perform some actions without having a whole separate project. This loop has advantages in terms of performance because, well, you're not required to jump to a whole new project. And even if you are, you're still passing the variables by reference. And another cool thing about this loop is it's reversed loop. Usually people think of loops as going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, but this will be going in the opposite direction. It will be going 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And this approach was taught to me by a guy named Arnott. I don't remember his last name, but he was a very wise man. So I'm going to show you how to do just that. So let's say that we have a CSV file called names, and it just has a couple names separated by a comma. And what we want to do is we want to go through this file, we want to process all these names and then do something with every record. And we want to do it as an inline loop. So why don't we give that a shot? So let's start off by reading the CSV file. Now configure the generate generic table action. Browse to our file, and it's a comment delimited. I don't want the row column. And the variable will be TB for table. See if it works. There's our data. Alright, so now we have a table called TB, and here's how we loop through it. So let's start off by getting the total number of rows in the table. I'm going to store it in a variable called TB underscore array. Array stands for row index. So next I'm going to construct the skeleton of the loop. So stick with me because this might seem confusing. So the skeleton is we're going to decrease the index, and then we have two if and else statements. This will be the start of our loop when we decrease the index. So let's give it a label, loop start. And the second if and else statement will be the end of our index. It's called loop end. So here's the idea. The idea is we start at the very last element. We got the number of rows, and we start decrementing it. And then as we loop through the table, we keep decrementing the index until we hit 0, or until we go below 0, at which point we'll break out of the loop. And the advantage to this method is if you're ever removing any elements from the table, because you're going backwards, you're not going to hurt yourself. If you were going forward, if you were going 1, 2, 3, 4, and you delete the row 3, if assuming the table shifts the indices to the next rows, your your whole loop will be messed up because you just messed up that index. In this scenario, where we go from back to beginning, this will not happen. So let's see what our conditions are. And I usually do these pretty fast. So first condition is our index smaller than 0? If it is, we we should probably jump to the end of the loop. And the second condition will be quite similar. Is our index still greater than 0? If it is, let's try to keep looping. So two conditions, this will jump to end, and this will jump back to beginning. And then here in the middle, this is where we do our processing. So in this case, let's get the values out of the table and log them to some file with some extra text. And we can do it pretty simple. We can copy this action, manage table data, stick it right here, and let's do get the data at the specified row and column. So there's our index. On the first row, this will be first name. Copy paste that. And our second row will be last name. And then finally, let's log it. Let's use the export variables action. And I gotta specify the path to the file. Let me put it on my desktop, just like this. I hope I'm not going too fast. I'm using shortcuts to copy paste a lot of these things. So let's call it names processed.txt. And we're going to spit out the first name, the last name, and also test text, just for fun. So there we have it. We read the CSV file, we loop through it, all in line, and then we retrieve the variables from the table, and we export them out to some text file. So I'm going to save this, and actually need to put this on a scheduler so I can run it, because it's an automation project. But you can use the same concept in mass projects as well. So let's see, run it on command only. Save it again. So there's my new project, and I'm gonna go ahead and try to run it. It looks like it finished right away, so let's look on the desktop. So now we have names process.txt, and if you look at this file, let's open the original. Gotta make it smaller. So notice the order here was reversed, because we started out John Smith, then Bob Brown, and here we have them at the bottom. John Smith, Bob Brown. So the loop basically went from the last one to the first one, and then we performed some action. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. So keep in mind, nothing wrong with the default for each loop. Nothing wrong with this guy. But if you're trying to keep your code organized, you don't want any extra projects. Or especially this is useful when you're nesting loops. When you have, say, 3 levels of loops, you really don't want to be using for each, just because of the number of variables that it will copy every time, which is usually the case. So I hope this was helpful to you. And this is Ivan with AdvToolware, and this concludes this presentation. Thank you for your time.